there's probably actually like a dozen companies that are doing effectively what we wanted to do, which was order food from your cell phone. The thing was, in 2005, iPhones didn't exist, apps didn't exist, restaurants weren't really on the internet. So the ecosystem didn't really exist yet for what we were trying to do, which was allow people to order food on their cell phones so they didn't have to wait in line at restaurants, basically, to make carry out faster. So we went to Harvard over our spring break to see Paul Graham give a talk called How to Start a Startup. We saw that talk. Afterwards, we met Paul. We told him our idea. This was actually Alexis's doing. So I was basically the engineer, and Alexis was the pretty face, the charming guy, except he didn't have a pretty face back then. He had this like ratty-ass, scraggly beard. But now he's a pretty guy. He's dating Serena Williams. He's doing okay. Anyway, we met Paul. We told him our idea. Y-Combinator didn't exist yet either. And in fact, that weekend for Paul was the impetus for Y-Combinator, because he met a bunch of folks, a bunch of people, a bunch of kids like me, basically, who wanted to start companies, wanted him to invest, and he told them all no, and then he felt guilty about it. So they announced YC. Alexis encouraged me. This is lesson number 1. This is a basic one, but here we go. He encouraged me after we met Paul, after we had gone back home to Virginia, to write an email to Paul thanking him for his time, basically. Which seems like a no-brainer, but I wasn't going to do it. I was really shy at the time. I just didn't want to bother him. And Alexis was like, just email him and say thanks. Paul responded and was like, oh, are you those guys from Virginia? I just announced this thing called Y-Combinator. You two should apply. And so we did. And we actually thought we had really good odds of getting in because we had already told Paul our idea. We talked to him for an hour about it. So we headed back to Boston for YC interviews and were ultimately rejected, which really pissed us off. Because I just said we talked to him about this thing for an hour already. So he could have saved us a trip. On our way back to Virginia, on the train, Paul called us and said, if you want to work on something else, come back. We like you guys. We just don't like that idea. We'll figure out what it is, and you can work on that. And so we did. And we had a brainstorming session. That's ultimately what led to Reddit. I still have my notebook. It's in my desk at work with the notes I took during that brainstorming session. And in there I wrote, front page of the internet. And so that's the idea we had going in. We were basically going to build a combination of Slashdot, which was my favorite website at the time. It was Slashdot, news for nerds, stuff that matters. It was one of the preeminent communities online. Gosh, I don't know if any of you even remember Slashdot. It's still around. It sold for $1 billion at one point. It was the best. It had the best users, the best content. We were basically going to try to recreate that community with more modern mechanics. But our motivation at the time was basically, I don't want to look stupid in front of Paul Graham. It wasn't to actually build the front page of the internet. It wasn't to build a big company. It wasn't to change the world. It wasn't even really to make money. It was, well, here we are. We lucked into the situation. Let's make the most of it, or at least, let's not look stupid. And this is lesson number 2. I'm going to stop counting them once I lose track of the numbers. But lesson number 2 is basically think bigger. That alone, like not having a plan, not having a vision, that should have killed us. But we're very fortunate that it did not. And actually, this pattern will come up a lot over the years for us, in that there's lots of things we did wrong that should have killed us, but we're very fortunate that it did not. So we're working on the site with no real plan, no real aspiration, no real design, no product plan, just kind of going with the flow. If you were building the front page of the internet, what would it do? That's kind of our mentality. And so we had the shell of the site. I remember a very clear moment. So we started actually working in June. On around June 15th or so, about 2 weeks in, Paul sent me this email. Now, we were Paul's kind pet project because of the way we got into YC, because he basically brought us back and helped us come up with this idea. He sent me this email that said, "Why haven't you guys launched yet? We've been working on it for 2 weeks." He's like, "Why haven't you launched yet? It's either because you're waiting until it's perfect or you're incapable of doing it. And I don't know which is worse." And, I was a 21-year-old kid. This was my idol in many respects. My feelings were hurt, to say the least. Remember, my only motivation was don't look stupid in front of Paul Graham. And so I responded to him in this actually kind of weak manner. I was like, well, here's all the things I'm working on. I was treating him like my boss, actually. There's another lesson in here, which is have enough self-respect that, Paul's not our boss. I don't owe him anything. He's an investor. Investors aren't your friends. Investors aren't your boss. And I was behaving like here's what I'm doing. No, I'm actually competent. Trust me. I was actually incompetent, probably. But nevertheless, I rushed, and we put something online on June 22nd. In fact, we didn't actually put it online. I emailed Paul and said, here it is. It's working. See? And it was just a link to this website that was running off a machine in our apartment, I believe. And then Paul wrote an essay. His essays were fairly popular at the time. He wrote an essay about startups or something, and he linked to Reddit. And so that's how we launched. I was sitting in our apartment, and I had my screen for my computer where I did my development, and I had a second screen in my field of vision that basically had the logs, the error logs. And it just started scrolling really fast. I was like, what the fuck? What's going on? And I'm looking at all this, basically, errors, and then I dig in and find out we're getting a ton of traffic. I'm just like, where, how? What happened? And I later learned it was because Paul just launched for us. The website was super shitty. I mean, if you think it's bad now, imagine how it was, with 3 weeks of work with people who had no idea what they were doing. But that's how we launched. And from that moment on, we continued to just try to make it look like it was working. So Alexis and I had a few hundred accounts between the two of us that we would submit content as on the site to make it look like it was working. Because we didn't want the front page to look blank, and we didn't want it to look like, all Spez, which was my username, and nothing, which was his, Spez, that'd be dumb. So we had all these fake usernames that we used. And we had this whole streamlined process for scraping other websites and submitting the content as fake usernames. So just kind of make that process more smooth for us. And so we did that for a few months, and occasionally, you'd see real users come in, and I'd recognize my mother's username, and I'd recognize my friends' usernames. But occasionally you'd see a user, and you'd be like, oh, who's that? And that was actually kind of a funny, a funny experience for us. We're like, oh, is that a real person? I guess, neat. And I remember taking the day off. This was one of the turning points in the company, a really important moment for us. So in August, so we've been online about 2 months now. In August, I took a day off. I don't remember why. I was tired, burned out. I didn't feel like working. Whatever. It just didn't work. And we had this problem on Reddit where if you didn't submit content, the front page would dry up. It would turn blank because we only allowed links less than 24 hours old on our front page. And so if we didn't have 25 submissions that day, the page would actually just slowly become blank as things expired. And so anytime I took a few hours off, I would see this happen. And so after taking an entire day off and not thinking about Reddit, I came home that evening and I was like, shit, what am I doing? Reddit's probably blank right now. This is a huge problem. And so I frantically opened my laptop, checked it out, and it was full of content. Front page was full. And that was the moment when we realized that we had a real thing. These were real users. And so that's when our motivation changed from let's not look dumb, the fear of failure motivator, to, okay, now we owe it to these people, however few there are, really probably a few hundred, maybe thousands, not a ton, to keep this thing online. Because somebody's getting value out of this. And that was really, really special moment for us. And that was the kind of modus operandi for the next few years, really. Just preserve it. Just let it grow. We had added features. We changed the design around here and there. But it's mostly, let's just keep this thing working. So we sold Reddit to Conde Nast in 2006 after about 18 months. We sold at the time because we were really dysfunctional. There was 4 of us by this point. There was Alexis and I. There was Aaron Swartz, whom you may have heard of. He was in Y-Combinator that first summer as well. He ended up joining us. We merged companies. And Chris Slow, who was our first employee, who was also in YC that summer. So really 3 of those first 8 YC companies turned into Reddit in some fashion or another. The problem we had was Alexis, his mother was ill. His mother had cancer. He found out that first summer, and she has since passed away. But that summer, the rest of that year, he was spending a lot of time with her in dealing with that. And so he was kind of gone, if not physically, definitely mentally a lot. Aaron, him and I had a fantastically productive 4 months, kind of over the winter of that first year. But then he lost interest. We had kind of different visions. More to the point, now that I reflect on it, he had a vision and I didn't really. But his vision was different from anything I could come up with. And so I wouldn't say we had a falling out, but we just kind of stopped working together. And then Chris Lowe, who was incredibly productive, was working on his PhD at the time. So he would spend all day working, and then he would go home at night, or he'd come home at night and work on Reddit, basically while I slept. So he's kind of a superhero. He still works at Reddit. Him and I have been working together for over 10 years now. But he would get up before I got up, go work on his PhD, come home, we'd have dinner together. I'd quit working, go to bed, and he'd be still up. So I don't know if he ever actually slept. Now he's got 2 babies, so he definitely doesn't ever actually sleep. But that left me at the time, during that first year, as like the only engineer working. And now we had to start to confront issues like spam and scaling and just lots of like every day was like an emergency. What do we need to take care of today just to keep the site online? And so I was burning out. I was just running out of energy. So when Conde was interested, we were interested. And we actually felt like our mentality during that negotiation was that we were getting away with something. That like somebody's gonna pay us for this piece of shit. Like we're completely dysfunctional. We're pretending like we put on a happy face when we talk to them, but we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know why we were doing it. I was like completely burned out, and they were gonna pay us. So we're like, yeah, it's a good deal. We'll take it. And we felt like we were giving them a bad deal. We may find out that was a pretty good deal for them. We'll see. So we ended up we sold to Conde. We moved to San Francisco. We worked in the Wired office. Wired.com was based in San Francisco. Most of Conde's a big publisher. They have Vanity Fair, Conde Nast Traveler, Vogue, like magazines. And they own some cable companies. They own a few TV stations. But they're basically a big media company. Almost entirely in New York City, except for Reddit and Wired, which they kept in San Francisco. So I moved to San Francisco at the same time as a bunch of these other dudes that you're going to hear talk. Very fortunately, we all kind of lived in the same space. And at the time, it was funny because everybody was in the early days of their company, and I was the only one who had sold a company. So for a time there, I was like this little shit who I had some money, I didn't work too hard, I just kind of hang around while everybody else was like busting their ass on their startup. So those are good days, those are fun days. But I worked for Conde on Reddit for the next 3 years. And Reddit continued to grow. we developed all sorts of bad habits. Here comes another lesson. Reddit just grew. Every month, it just kind of grew. Whether it was fast or slow or downtime or adding new features or not adding new features, it just kind of grew. And so we had these inside jokes. You know, we would be down for a few hours, and we'd turn the site back on, and traffic would jump by 10%. And so we'd just be like, man, maybe we should have downtime more often. Like, maybe that's why we're growing. Or, you know, maybe if we don't add features, maybe that's why we're growing. It was kind of like we knew we didn't know what we were doing, but then we also felt like maybe we were doing something right. And I've seen a lot of companies go through this. They're growing, many of them sometimes quite quickly, and they think they're hot shit. Founders think they're hot shit. The whole team thinks they know what they're doing. Like, they're king of the world. Everybody else is dumb, but we've got it figured out. And that may last even a couple of years. And if those companies don't realize that they don't know what they're doing, you know, they enjoy that nice ride and then they crater. This happens all the time, all the time. MySpace is probably the best example. I don't know if any of you even remember MySpace. But there was a time when MySpace was king of the world. Like, they were the social network. You know, they were the company everybody was chasing. They sold for like $500 million, which everybody thought was a lot of money at the time. I mean, it's a lot of money, but Facebook's worth $200 and some billion, so that's the discrepancy. But then they didn't know what they're doing, and they just cratered. And you look at a company like Facebook that also went through that growth, and you know, right place, right time, made better decisions than MySpace, but still didn't really know what they're doing. They hit a few plateaus over the years, but they figured their shit out. They got their shit together. They became good managers. They hired the right people. They actually had a plan, and they've powered through it. And so I'm always, whenever I'm talking to young people starting their companies, especially if those companies are going well, try to remind them, ask them, are you going to be MySpace or are you going to be Facebook? And it takes some amount of humility to realize that you don't know what you're doing. And at Reddit, we did not know what we were doing. And so I've been very fortunate, Reddit has been very fortunate in that we still have time, right? Reddit still grows, and we've got time to clean things up. But, and Reddit's a 10-year-old company, which is very rare for a 10-year-old company to still be in this position. But that's something I'm very, very thankful for. And if you find yourself in that position on your first company and everything's going right, it's not you. Trust me, it's not you. And even if it is you, remind yourself, it's not me. It's, congratulations, you started an internet company and the internet is growing. You start a company in a growth market, it's going to grow. That's nice, but it's not going to grow forever. So I'm going to pause there and see, do we have any questions right now at this point? Yeah.
So I have two questions. One is, like you said, that your first company wasn't the right time to really explore that. And I was wondering what would have, I mean, hindsight is 2020 now, but what would have been key indicators that it wasn't the right time?
Well, I think, I mean, I kind of explained it. We were swimming upstream. You know, there's all these problems we would have to solve. Okay, so the idea, the very specific idea, is ordering food from your cell phone. Well, we would have to explain to restaurants, like, what an app was. But apps didn't exist. So we'd have to explain, you'd have to go even further. We'd have to explain to consumers, like, explain to consumers that, yes, you can use your cell phone for things other than making calls and texting people, which were basically the only two use cases a phone had at the time. You had these, like, kind of crappy mobile websites, but that was it. So we'd have to explain that. So that's one kind of element of the current going against us. We'd have to get restaurants online and explain that people can put in orders through things other than fax machines. So that's another one. It's nothing was playing in our favor. And so you want to have as little friction as possible, right? Especially as first-time entrepreneurs, in hindsight, we didn't know, like, we were doomed to failure. And I'm glad Paul and YC recognized that. But we would have to just be doing too many things at once. So just give yourself a chance to succeed, right? Just don't start in a market that doesn't exist where you have to create both sides of the equation, right? None of that stuff existed yet. Now, everybody knows what apps are. There's distribution mechanisms. Everybody has phones in their pocket. Everybody's online. Restaurants and stores and whatnot are very tuned to like different channels of customers. Where am I going to get my customer from? People are thinking in a different way, so it's way easier now. And that's why those companies now, Eat 24, Order Ahead, all Open Table, all the kind of that genre of company, they're doing pretty well. But they wouldn't have worked 10 years ago.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, how do you know your idea is bad? Like, I think Paul told you your idea was bad, but then if he didn't, how would you know it's
Well, here's the thing. All ideas are bad.
Okay.
Just start with that premise. All ideas are bad. Because if it's such a good idea, somebody else would have done it and succeeded by now.
Right.
So now it's not that easy. The thing is, good founders can take a bad idea really far and make something of it. And then all of a sudden it doesn't seem so bad anymore. And they can take a company that shouldn't exist just through like raw horsepower. Good technology, good marketing, good, processes internally. And bad founders can take the best idea, MySpace, and ruin it. I shouldn't call them bad founders because they sold their company and left and Fox killed it, whatever. But there are many examples of companies that fail. Two companies start at the same time and one fails and one succeeds, right? The difference is the founders. So I wouldn't overthink, is this a good idea, is a bad idea? The way I try to frame it is, as an entrepreneur, is this an idea that I can run with? Do I have an intuition about the market? Do I understand the customers? Do I have the ability to build it myself? Try to stack up as many unfair advantages as possible, because that's what life is all about, right? At least that's what success in business is all about, accumulating advantages and using them. So who do you know? What insight do you have? What are you good at? Like, play to your strengths. Don't force the issue.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
So maybe in this vein, some people say it's all in the idea. Others say it's all in the execution. Where do you stand there? And are the same people good at ideas that are also good at executing?
I think you'll find that people who are good at it's both of them are learned skills. You can learn to be good at executing. That's why I'd say a great first move, if you're not going to start your own company, is to join another company that's doing well, or that might do well, or people you like, or people you admire, or whatever. It could be a shitty company. Either way, you're going to learn a lot of lessons. And that's how you kind of learn the execution. It's just by being around it, trying and failing, and trying and failing. You'll learn all of those lessons. And then you'll become more savvy about ideas. A good idea is really just a process of, like, am I in a good market? Is it a big space? Like, can this market support a large company? I think that's the mistake a lot of first-time entrepreneurs make. If I were to ask you all, by you all I mean college kids, what company do you want to start? I bet a third of this room wants to make a company that makes it easy to exchange used textbooks, and probably wants to start a company that makes it easy to find what's going on in town tonight, and probably wants to make a company that helps me discover new music. Because those are the problems you have as a college kid. Probably some dating app. How do I find girls? Right? Which is similar to the what's going on tonight problem. Those are your ideas. I'm certain of it. Because I've talked to thousands of college kids, and they're always pitching me those ideas. And so it does require a little bit more experience and savvy to think, like, okay, what is an actually good idea? What has a big market? What do I have a chance of succeeding in? And what do people want? But I tell you, those ideas all suck. And you know why they suck? Because every single person has those ideas and fails at them anyway. So not every single person, but the odds are not in your favor. So experience and time, I think, is more important. But if you have an intuition, if you are the customer, it's a lot easier. That's where I would start with. If you're a first-time entrepreneur, try to find a situation where you are the customer. Just don't do one of those things. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with my story for another minute or two. 2009. Man, I really have this microphone in my face. Okay. 2009 was the end of my contract at Conde Nast. I left because I wanted to do something new. I've been working on Reddit at that point for about 5 years. There was only 6 of us. The site at this point probably had around, call it 30 million users, monthly users. So it was good. It was nice. We were growing. We were always growing. This is kind of one of the bad habits, is I took that for granted. I was mentioning that before. I didn't even realize, it just didn't feel like a success to me because that's all we ever knew was growth. It was never fast growth. It was just kind of slow and steady growth. Meanwhile, companies like YouTube, which were started after Reddit and sold before we sold, that's what, in my mind, that's what success was. So Reddit didn't feel like success. It just felt like a nice thing. So I left in 2009 because I wanted to learn. I felt like I was too young to be the best engineer at this company, which is true. I wanted somebody to look up to. I wanted to do a business that was involved in the exchange of money. Because on Reddit, I felt like we were always trying to contrive business models, and it just felt like we were, again, swimming upstream. So I left. I started another company called Hipmunk with this fellow named Adam Goldstein. It's in the travel space, so we help people find flights and hotels. Hipmunk was one of the best experiences I've ever had. Travel is a shitty space. It is tough. It is very, very competitive. It is very cutthroat. There's basically 2 players in travel, Priceline and Expedia. Every other travel company you've heard of in the United States is owned by one of those 2 companies, except for Hipmunk. And so you're in this situation where you're just kind of stuck between, in a duopoly. And those companies are very, very wealthy companies. So I had the experience, and I would suggest, if you can put yourself in this position, we didn't get it at Reddit, of working at a company that every day has to consider its own mortality. I learned a lot of really good lessons there. Like I said before, Reddit always grew. Hipmunk, its natural state was death. Like, Hipmunk would prefer to have 0 users. And if you turn your back on it for 1 second, it's like, poof. And so we had to get really savvy about where are our customers? Who are our customers? How do we get them? What is their experience they're going to have on the site? How do we give them the best experience? How do we optimize every single revenue channel we had? Those are really, really important lessons. And we had a really good time of it. Hipmunk's still around. Hipmunk's doing great. But it is tough. But I unlearned all of those bad habits that we had that we developed at Reddit. It's funny because Hipmunk was known, and it kind of still is known for having a really nice product. It's very pretty. It's easy to use, which contrasts nicely with Reddit, which is perhaps neither of those things. But it's the same people. We were forced to actually, these things all of a sudden mattered in a way that they didn't matter in the past before. So Hipmunk, over the next 5 years, we'd raise about $50 million, hire about 80 people, sell a lot of plane tickets, sell a lot of hotels, make a name for us in the space, learn a lot of really important lessons. I had a really good, really fun time there. I was the CTO. That's where I finally learned how to actually manage people. Reddit was only 6 people when I left. And those were all really, really good skills. Got to hire a lot of people. Unfortunately, had to fire people, build an executive team, learn how to operate a company with discipline. And so after a few years of that, after about 4 years of that, I started to kind of get that itch again. We had hired really well to the point where I didn't have much of a job left. Our VP of engineering and our VP of product had basically kind of taken my job from me, in a good way. They were really good at managing engineers and managing product and doing all these things. So I'd just kind of come to work. I'd help people out. I'd like to mentor the younger engineers. That was something I really enjoyed doing. Code reviews was something I really enjoyed doing. But it's not like I felt like, again, I'm not learning anymore. And so I started thinking, what's next? But I never wanted to leave Hipmunk. Meanwhile, Reddit starts to go through turmoil. The CEO, Yishan, left. He had basically, could probably best be described as a midlife crisis. Reddit CEO is a tough gig, And he had been there a couple of years. He joined Reddit when Reddit spun out of Conde Nast in around 2012-ish. I forget exactly when, but Reddit became an independent company again with Conde Nast being the initial investor. Conde wisely realized that Reddit was suffocating inside it. So I kind of see Reddit there. It's independent. It's doing okay, but I've still got Reddit on the brain. And so in many respects, coming back to Reddit was something of like a dream job for me. I do events like this. I come here and talk about kind of the Reddit story, and I was a co-founder of Reddit, but I wasn't actually at Reddit anymore, and I always felt kind of a little silly, answering for a company that I really don't have any control over anymore. And so Reddit would occasionally check in and basically be like, hey, Steve, do you want to come back? I'm like, nope. Well, yes, but I can't. I'm at Hipmunk. I made promises to these people. I hired these people. I said, we're in it together. We're going to take on the travel industry. We're going to build this product in this cutthroat space. We're going to succeed, come hell or high water. Like, we're going to do this. And I love those people. Like, we had a really, good time together. And Hipmunk was very cultish, too. So the thought of leaving was so painful. And I would only consider it for about 5 seconds at a time. No, not leaving. And so that goes on for, almost a year, really, until the summer of 2015. So about 8 months ago. Reddit, for lack of a better description, was actively committing suicide. I don't know how familiar with the drama you all are. I think it was pretty hard to miss if you use the internet. The community was in open revolt, really mad at the company. The moderators were mad at us. The community's mad at the moderators are mad at the community. They both hate the company. And it boiled over to the point where the moderators basically shut down the site. Of the largest communities, they were so angry, they shut the site down for about 3 days. And I was like watching this. And when the site went down, literally, this is on July, I think it's like July 2nd. It's called the blackout, when Reddit basically went dark. Every single person I knew, I think, texted me and said, you should go back to Reddit. And I was like, who the fuck wants to do that? But I was in really close contact with Alexis, my co-founder, who had returned to Reddit during that time, with a lot of the Reddit investors, trying to just kind of give advice on what to do, how to get out of this. And I took a trip. I went to Sonoma, which is an hour away from San Francisco, wine country, nice, bougie area. Spending time with my friends at a birthday party, and this is like weighing very heavily on me. And I'm talking about it openly with all of my friends, and I'm just thinking, and half of them are like, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, and the other half are like, why would you run into a burning building? And I remember this moment very clearly. It was Saturday morning, July 4th. I was laying in bed, and I was thinking about Reddit's options. And I was kind of playing through all the different scenarios of things they could do, of changes they could make, and I had this realization that they can't do it. There is no path out. And I've seen this before. When our biggest competitor, Dig, committed suicide. I don't remember the exact year, call it 2010-ish. Dig was always bigger than Reddit in that space, in kind of social news space. They fucked up. They did this redesign, pissed off their users, and the users all came to Reddit. Literally in one day. It was the only day Reddit's traffic actually had like a step function increase in traffic. Our traffic literally doubled in one day. Really happy day for us. I wasn't even there, and I was just like, finally, fuck those guys. I hated Dig so bad. I hated them so bad. It just was offensive to me that they were doing better than us because that company had no soul. So I was really pleased at their demise. It was nothing we did, right? They just fucked up. You take them. So that morning, I was like, Reddit can't do it. And so then I started trying to get a hold of Sam Altman. He was the president of YC. He had led, Reddit raised a $50 million round in 2014, and Sam led that round personally. I was trying to get a hold of him to tell him, yeah, yes, I'll do this. But I couldn't because I was in Sonoma, and I'm a T-Mobile user, and my phone didn't work. And you know, there's two places on the planet where T-Mobile doesn't work: Sonoma and State College, Pennsylvania. and so I couldn't get a hold of him. And so we're at like this winery, getting a tasting for my buddy's birthday. My phone rings and it's Sam. So I go outside and I answer the phone, and I could hear him. Sam is like the most annoying person to negotiate against. He's just relentless, and he's very persuasive, and like he will use every angle of attack. And I could hear. I answer the phone. I could literally hear him like inhale, and he's ready to make his like last plea. Like, will you please do this? And I was like, before he could say anything, I was just like, I'm in. I'll do it. And he was just like, oh, thank God. and so then that's it. That's like when we like started game planning this thing. Between that phone call, I thought I might go back as early as Monday. I hadn't told Hipmunk yet. Reddit didn't know. The only people who knew at this point were me and Sam. And it was on. So I ended up not going back until Friday. That was telling Hipmunk that I was leaving was easily the most difficult thing I've ever done. There was not a dry eye in the room. Like I said before, Hipmunk was very much a cult that I had built, and I just felt like I was letting them down. But they were incredibly supportive. It was just like simultaneously one of the hardest moments of my life, but also, you know, it's that affection was very, very powerful. Contrast that with my first. So I go to Reddit Friday afternoon. It takes a while for them to negotiate things with Ellen. Right, it's kind of a big deal, swapping out CEOs. Ellen and I did we talked to the press together. Ellen and I have always gotten along. It was very, very kind of an awkward situation, but there was no animosity between us. We're talking to the press together, which was really tough. I don't know how she did that, honestly. And then we addressed the company together. So she basically read a statement to them that she had prepared that said she was leaving. So she did this thing. She read this thing, and then she left the room. So now I'm sitting in front of the company. It's about 75, 80 people staring at me. It was almost the same size as Hipmunk, the same size room almost. And instead of having this like wave of affection, it was like this wave of anger of these people who had been through so much. I was the third CEO in a year. The company was getting ridiculed in the press. It was potentially actually dying. And these people were just tired and angry and confused. And man, that was tough. I usually feed off that energy of people, looking at me, and it was just like it wasn't there. And so it's like, hey, I'm here. We're gonna fix this thing. I'm gonna make the world proud of Reddit. I'm gonna make you guys proud to be at Reddit. Like, I'm in it. We're gonna do this together. And it went off okay. Everybody goes back to their desks. And so I'm sitting on my laptop because I'm also telling the community. I'm doing like an AMA with the community. And I'm wheeling around the office just introducing myself to people because I didn't know any of these people. All of the old-time Reddit folks that were with me in the past were at Hipmunk. And so I go, the first guy I meet, I'm like, hey, I'm Steve. And he looks at me and he's like, he just goes back to his computer. And I was like, oh, fuck. I should have just fired him on the spot. I fired him 2 weeks later. But it was tough. It was tough. I wish I had kept like a journal for those first few months. because it's such a blur now. But it was just total chaos. Chaos external, chaos internal. I did keep notes. I did this thing where I basically had one-on-ones with every person in the company over the next couple of weeks. And I'd meet them, and I'd just like, what's going on? What do you do here? You know, and I'd ask them 2 questions. First I'd ask them just kind of overtly, hey, who's good here? Who should I be talking to? Who can I rely on? Like, who are the best people? Who do you rely on? And I'd write that down. And then I'd ask, you know, hey, you know, you don't have to tell me, but, you know, if you and I seem to trust each other, you know, who's not so good here? and so I'd have another list of who was bad. But the problem was, and I thought I was just going to kind of build up this list of the bad people, and then, you know, I could fire them. And the problem was the lists didn't, they were not separate lists. They actually overlapped, and different people would tell me different things, and it was really confusing. And in hindsight now that I know everybody and I've been there a while, it all makes sense of what everybody's agendas were. But this was the first time I'd been in a company where people had agendas. It was very weird. Because I'm pretty much, I wear my emotions on my sleeve, pretty straight shooter. I'm not a great liar, except when I am. And it was so surreal. But, you know, we made it through. We've done a lot of hiring. The culture at the company is so much better than it was before. The morale is much, much higher. I mean, it couldn't not be higher because the morale at most companies could not get as low as it was at Reddit when I arrived. Like, it just couldn't, it's not possible at most companies because people just quit. But people didn't quit Reddit because they loved Reddit, the idea, the thing. And so they put up with all this bullshit internally just to be a part of it. But they were really, really unhappy. And now we're out of that period, and it's a really good feeling. You know, it's been a slog, but we've made a lot of changes, and now we're getting back to a state where I think, you know, we're actually getting productive, and we can do new things, and we can do all of these things that we want to do. And now we actually know our place in the world. You know, the mistake I made in the early days of not knowing what our mission was, that's not a problem for me anymore. It's not a problem for us anymore. You know, Reddit fulfills this very kind of basic human need of connection, of allowing people to share, you know, themselves, to be their real selves, not their real name, human carcass, like I'm on a stage self, but like my interests in video games, my desire to get relationship advice, my interest in sports, all of these other things, these other facets of my personality, and everybody else, you can do that on Reddit. And we provide that we've got 240 million users right now. And, you know, we're chasing 1 billion. And I can see a very clear path to get there because we haven't internationalized. So, like, we're almost entirely English speaking. So we have this, like, massive opportunity on our hands. And it's very rare that, and I feel so very fortunate to have this chance a second time. Not many people get one chance, and I've had 2. To be a part of something that can actually, you know, change the world, that can actually make a difference. Because we do now. You know, we save lives, we provide entertainment, we provide people a place where they can be their true selves. You know, they can, you know, people come out on Reddit. People get very good relationship advice. They, you know, participate in their hobbies and connect with other people. They exchange kidneys. There's all sorts of wonderful things that happen on Reddit, big and small. And to do that on an even larger scale would be really, really incredible, and that's what we're chasing. So I'll stop there again for more questions. No questions? Yeah, I thought so.
Hi. Sorry. What did you do to fix the culture at Reddit specifically?
Okay, so culture's a funny thing. We started by removing the people who didn't fit in. Well, actually, I should say, we started by defining it. What are our values? I used to think kind of missions and values were kind of these bullshit, you know, MBA business things. Right, for context, right, I've been an engineer my entire career until this CEO job. But those things aren't bullshit. They're tools. They're tools for making decisions. whether it's a product decision, like what should we be building, where are we going, what path are we on, and it's tools for making hiring decisions. Who should we hire? Does this person uphold our values? Are they going to make decisions the way we want them to? You know, are they going to be a part of this? And so first we started defining the values, which for us, let's see if I can remember them off the top of my head. The first was evolve. You know, Reddit's got a long history, a lot of baggage, good and bad, a lot of product decisions. 10 years old, you can't not have baggage. But we got to look towards the future. There's a lot of stuff we can do, and we got to look towards the future. The second is remember the human. I've never liked that wording, but I think it's really important, which is there are people on the other side of the computers. You know, it's our duty to make sure those people are treated like people and are not harmed on Reddit. You know, they feel safe on Reddit. They don't fear for their personal well-being. They have a good experience. The third is listen, debate, ship. At Reddit, it's really easy to get in these like conversations of, okay, what the community do? Maybe we should do this. Well, this is how we've always done things. I'm not sure. Like, we might make the community upset. Like, you can have those debates, but when it's over, when we leave the room, get to work and ship it, even if you disagree. Finally, what would SNU do? That's my favorite value. SNU is our mascot. It's kind of a grab bag value, but it's actually, I found it very effective. SNU is not an asshole, right? SNU ships. I can kind of ascribe any personality things I want to SNU, but it's actually worked out really well because everybody that works at Reddit has an intuitive sense of what our mascot is. SNU is an optimist, you know. And it was funny, I was interviewing a guy. Part of my job as a CEO is to repeat these things over and over and over again, right? To get people to buy in. I was interviewing this guy, and we were talking about values. He asked, you know, what are your values? What is important to you? And I said, you know, what would SNU do? And he was like, God, you're the third person to say that to me today. And I was like, fuck yeah, it's working, right? It's really important. It's really important. So you create those values and you hold people to them, and you hire people who believe in those things. And that's how you change culture. You reward the behaviors that are good, and you don't accept the behaviors that are bad. So it takes time. And there's definitely times, you know, a couple months in where I'm just like, I miss Hipmunk. You know, I miss that culture. I miss those people, and I miss that feeling at work. And I don't know if I'm going to have that again. But now, you know, 8 months in, I'm really proud to say that, yeah, I have that again. And it's really great. And I remember some of those moments. Like the first time Reddit, there was no drinking at Reddit when I arrived. There was a dry company that had incidents in the past. I was like, I can't work at a company where I can't party with these people. And so when I proposed like this party, people were really nervous. They're like, you can't do that. You can't do that. Like bad things will happen. And it's just like, look, we're adults, right? Like we have to be able to treat each other like adults. And so we had that first party, and it was like fine, right? It was no big deal. You know, people came out, they had a good time, they went home, but it's a silly. But I remember being really happy, and people came here like I didn't even know Reddit was going to be able to do that. It seems like such a little thing, but little moments like that where people realize, oh, we can do this together. We can change the culture. So a very long answer, and it's a tricky thing, but I think it starts with just knowing what your culture is and holding people to it.
Thank you so much.
So, thanks for the question.
Hey, Steve, we've got about, 4 minutes left, so more
'Kay.
questions.
Okay, quick question. You know, thinking back to the Usenet days, you know, a lot of places got, caught and taken over by trolls, right? And Reddit doesn't really have that very much. Why?
Did you say Reddit doesn't have trolls?
You know what? I think they get modded down, and you know, it seems like a really quite friendly community. I mean, compared to what it was, you know, elsewhere.
Okay, so I'll answer your question honestly, but I'm still amused at the premise. As somebody who has 100 accounts and fucks with people all the time. But we have done a good job in certain areas where In hindsight, we made a couple of really good decisions. The way our comments work, the sorting algorithm and the voting and the hiding of low-scoring stuff, all that stuff is public. It's all open source, but there's some subtleties in there that I think have played out really well. Because I've always wondered, when I look at like our comments, which I think are the best on the internet, and YouTube comments, or really comments on anywhere else online, even Facebook, and those guys are really, really smart. I just wondered, like, okay, do we have better users, or do we have better technology? And when we're smaller, I thought we just had better users. Well, we've just got the best users, because these people are funny, they're smart, they're with it, and the rest of the internet is dumb. But now we've got 240 million users. There's not that many smart, funny people in the world. So I can't claim it's our users anymore, because our users are the same users on the rest of the internet. And so there's, I think, a number of subtle things in the product, and that on the technology side that work. And then there's also this kind of, I think, cultural inertia, where people know, like, they come to expect what's acceptable behavior on Reddit and what's not. And to the extent that users can enforce that, they do, and to the extent that moderators can enforce that, they do. And when there's a violation of that, which we see from time to time, where sometimes you'll get a big community, and we had a couple that we dealt with last year, a big community of people behaving in a way that, like, is incongruent with the way people feel Reddit should be, the whole thing kind of erupts. And so we had some of these big communities last year that were really bad, some of these really vile, horrible users, the worst kind of trolls. And we didn't have the tools and technology to deal with it, but the whole thing felt wrong. And so that's where we kind of stepped in and just, with a very blunt object, like, banned some of these things. So there is a cultural inertia, and it's not always accepted, and you can kind of feel when it's not right, and that's when we'll take extra steps. But I do think there's a part of it is just the simple technology of promoting the good stuff and hiding the bad. Okay, do we have time for one more question?
Let's do it.
Okay, one more.
Make it good.
Let's end on a high note.
So you mentioned how one of the risks that you have is that people could just wholesale go somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, what do you do to sort of monitor things to make sure that you're not pissing people off? And are there things about your technology that make it sticky so that even if you piss them off a little bit, you have time to find out?
That's a good question. Why don't people leave, basically? Well, I've got a couple stories there. One, I'll just tell you a story. When I got back to Reddit, the community was pissed off. We had with some of these bad communities, like these really racist ones that we were trying to wrestle with. We're wrestling with this kind of free speech idea, and these users are just angry about a ton of stuff. I told the company, when users are complaining about the front page, that's how you know we're doing a good job. Because users always complain about the front page when there's nothing else left to complain about. And then sure enough, after like 5 months, users were complaining about the front page algorithm, because we had made a tweak and it kind of threw off the cadence of things. And users were just like, God, the front page sucks. And the users were kind of annoyed, but in the company, we were just like, I was like, see? We're doing our jobs. The users are mad about the front page. But to answer your question, I don't really monitor where people are leaving. People are always like, oh, I'm going to go to vote. It's like, whatever. Okay, do that. I think if you spend too much time thinking about your competitors, you're in trouble. We spend a lot of time just thinking about how do we make Reddit the best. And that it's very intuitive for us. The frustrating thing is we don't always have the time or the resources to actually execute on these ideas. But in our heart of hearts at Reddit, everybody who works at Reddit loves Reddit, loves being on the site, loves using our apps, loves using the product. And so we try to think, as long as we enjoy using it, we're probably doing something right. So there are ways of measuring sentiment. We do run polls with both our community and the moderators. It is actually something we measure. But it's not something we take action on. We're like, oh, users are upset today, therefore we have to do something. It's more of just one of those numbers where it's just kind of so big and fuzzy that you can't, there's nothing, it's hard for any one thing to actually move that needle, like on a day-to-day basis. But it is something we're aware of. So we watch it, and then we just go back to work and think, all right, what are the most important things we can do to make our community and site a little bit better today? And you just keep chipping away at it, chipping away at it. And we have actually seen sentiment rise over the past few months, and that's been nice to see. It's not perfect. I know we've got a long way to go, but yep.
Sweet. Thank you, Steve. Let's give Steve a round of applause.
Thank you all.